Hello. Today we're going to talk about how workflow is put together in my corporation's MyForms product. This video references a previous demonstration of workflow. We have a link in the bottom left of this YouTube video. If you have not seen that video, go take a look at it now. We'll wait here for you to come back. All right. Now that you are familiar with what the workflow looks like in operation of the form, let's look at how it's designed from a development perspective. As you can see, I've loaded the same form here in my MyForms designer. I am going to open our script editor so that we can see how the workflow is actually put together. Before we get into the actual workflow event handling itself, I do want to draw attention to these three constants. We will see numerous references to the dispatcher, inspector, and manager's constant for what queues that the form is routed to. These are just substitutions here, and we used the dispatchers, the users, and the administrators queue sort of arbitrarily here, but they could be configured to be whatever you need for your workflow purposes. Now, workflow is handled on the MyForms server in a queuing mechanism. We have a queue for every group and for every user that is configured on the server. And what we need to do as a form developer is tell the server how we're going to route it, how it should make that workflow decision. We do that by handling the server queuing event. If I double click on this, we will see that this event has already been handled in this example and the logic is already in place, but we'll take a look at what's actually going on. This event passes in information about the current environment upon which the form is operating. For instance, we know who is triggering the most recent upload of the form. We know where the form has been in the past. We know what groups and users exist on the server as a whole. And this form takes advantage of all of that information to make the correct workflow decision. So as we can see, we're going to have a series of if-then statements to try to figure out what we should do based on the previous state of this form. So the first thing we're doing is we're looking to see if the previous state of the form was in the dispatcher's queue. While this is not directly demonstrated in the previous video, this allows inspectors to have forms routed to them from dispatchers if it's been to a dispatcher a second time. So if the current group is dispatchers, we say that the new queue is going to be the inspector's queue, and we provide some details on that. And we set a couple of status variables on the form so that we're able to more easily track this going forward. We also call this function called init inspectors that I'll describe in a little bit in some detail later on. If, however, our current group was not the dispatchers, we then continue down our logic chain. The next thing we look to see is if it's in the inspectors, and in fact the previous video demonstrated this. So in that case, as an inspector, I'm uploading this form back to the server. We want to make a couple of additional checks to see what's going on. If the inspection signature field has ink, that's a convenience function to see if essentially the signature is in place in this case. Then we want to route it to the manager's queue, and we saw that it happened in the video. After the inspector had signed it, it routed to managers. We provide some details that the inspector's signature was found, and we again initialize the inspector's list, as we'll see later. However, if the inspector had not signed it, we want to make a different choice. In this case, we're going to look in the inspectors field. This is a pick list field that has a list of other possible places to route this form. As we can see, we're first looking to see if that field is empty, and if it is, the inspector's upload is just going to be routed to the inspectors again. So this would be the case where an inspector uploaded it, didn't sign it, and it just needed more attention from either that same inspector or somebody else, and they can take further action on it. However, the inspectors are also able to route it back to the dispatchers if they want to, in case they need some sort of more facility information. In that case, we route the new queue to the dispatchers, and we set that we moved it there. The last conditional we'll take a look at is if it's coming in from the manager. So this was our last state in the video when the manager uploads it after their approval or their disapproval. So in the video, the manager approved everything, but in a real-world scenario, certainly the manager might find the inspection not to their liking. If that's the case, we want to make sure that we route it back to the appropriate place. So you might recall that there were two questions on that approval page. One was whether the facility information was correct or not. And If the approver or the manager said that it was not correct, we want to route it back to the dispatcher so that the whole process can begin again. That could be a situation where maybe there's just some question about where the actual location was or something like that. Assuming it goes through this check without being stopped, the next question was whether the inspection documentation was sufficient or not. If it was not sufficient, we want to send it back to the inspector so that they can make additional notations on it as needed, or maybe revisit the facility. Now, you'll note in this case, we're just sending it back to the inspector's group as a whole. We certainly could route it back to the individual inspector if we wanted to. That information is available to us. We can see who uploaded it previously, and we could send it there. But assuming neither of those are the case, the next thing we look for is whether the approver, the manager, has signed it themselves. If they have, in other words, the manager's signature does indeed have ink, then we know that this form does not need any more workflow. We can just allow all of our exports to take place on the form, and we just exit this routine without setting a new queue or any new queue details. Of course, if the manager or approver did not sign it, we want to potentially send it back to a different manager so that they can sign it, or they have their own drop-down. They can choose to send it back to the inspectors if they'd like as well, and we handle that case there. For good measure, we handle a couple of error cases here just to make sure that the form doesn't just get retired in case we're trying to move to a queue that doesn't exist or something like that. The last thing we'll take a look at here is this init inspectors function. Many of the cases up above were calling this near the end of their workflow step. The reason for this is we want to actually provide a list of inspectors that are available on the server. This way, rather than just routing it to an inspector general queue, we could route it to a specific inspector if we'd like. We have this as a convenience function. Really, we're passing in some parameters that the server queuing event had, and we're looking through that to see who's a member of which group, and then we're populating the two pick lists. There's a pick list called inspectors and a pick list called inspectors2, and in one case we're populating inspectors, in the other case managers, and that allows us to do some more fine-grained routing. So this is how our workflow is put together for this form. Your workflow can be even more simplistic than this, or it can be arbitrarily complex. Doesn't really matter. The server handles it in the same manner through the use of queues for groups and users. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact my corporation support at support@mi-corporation.com. Thank you and have a good day.